Our guest this week on Veterans Chronicles is Vietnam veteran Mike Thornton. He also served as a Navy SEAL and is a recipient of the Medal of Honor. And Mike, thanks very much for your time with us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Let's start at the beginning of your story. Where were you born and raised?
I was born in Greenville, South Carolina. As my father said, at the young age of 6 months, I crawled over to Spartanburg, and I was raised in the Spartanburg area.
And was there a family history of service in your family?
Yes, my father, he served in World War II from 37 to 46. All my uncles were all in the military. So I always knew I had dyslexia really bad. I always knew I was going to go in the military. I just didn't know when. Of course, when Vietnam came up, if you didn't have good grades, you were on your way to join the Army. But I always wanted to be a Navy frogman. And so I joined to be a UDT.
Underwater demolition.
Underwater demolition guy.
Why did you always want to be a frogman?
Saw the movie The Five Sutherland Brothers, and it's about a board from Portland, Oregon. They all died trying to save each other. And that's the way my father brought us up. That family was everything. My dad only had a 6th grade education, but the family always came first. And how they risked each other all their lives to save their older brother, who was down in the engine department when the ship blew up. And then I saw that crazy movie with Richard Whitmire, the UDTs in Korea. I said, that's me, because I was a very good swimmer, a good athlete, but I had dyslexia so bad. I knew I was studying hard, and my family knew I was studying hard, but I just didn't have the idea that we had things back then. We just thought we were dumb. But as we know now today, there's a lot of brilliant people with dyslexia.
How old were you when you joined the Navy?
I joined on the 120-day program. I was actually 17 years old, and I went in right after the summer and went to join the USS Brewster, and they decommissioned it, and that way I opened up a door to go into BUDS training. So it was called Underwater Demolition Recruit Training back then. And later on, in the 70s, it became BUDS, basically Underwater Demolition SEAL Team training.
You joined in 67?
Yes, 67, yes.
67. Talk about BUDS training, SEALs training. I mean, that's some of the most intense.
It was, we started off with 129 guys in my class, and we actually graduated with 12. 4 of them were rolled back to the next class, and which is something that you'll never forget. It's, like you say, it's very intense, very hard. And when somebody tells me, oh, they went to BUDS, and I said, what class you were in? He said, I don't remember. Well, if you ever went through UDT SEAL training, you would remember. You'd never forget that. So I just look at them and kind of shake my head and laugh and walk away. But it's a camaraderie of each other that that you'll never forget for the rest of your lives. And many of these guys are still very close friends of mine, even 50-something years later.
So they test you in a number of different ways, but talk about how they test your camaraderie in that moment.
My father taught me something a long time ago. If it's to be, it's up to me, And you used to hear these guys, they quit, they ring the bell 3 times. Why'd you ring the bell? Well, my friend rang the bell. Well, he's not your friend if he's ringing the bell going through this type of training. What happens when the bullets are flying and the grenades are being tossed and all that? Those are the friends that you count on, and that's what the whole mission is. It's not about me, it's about us, it's about the team, it's about what we all believe in, and we would all give our lives for the other guy, which we've done many, many times throughout my tours of Vietnam.
So you never thought about ringing the bell?
No.
Never. What happened after you completed SEAL training?
I went to SEAL Team 1. I wanted to be a Navy frogman. We didn't even know when we went through training that SEAL Team 1 was, and I said, I want to be a Navy frogman. And some of our guys went to UDT 11, 12, and 13, and I went with myself and Hal Kirkendall and Mike Lacaze and Timmy O'Farrell and a bunch of other guys. We all went to SEAL Team, and we all did tours together in Vietnam. So it was kind of like our training class was still together, even though we were in Vietnam. We were in different positions, but we were always there for each other.
Now, the action for which you were awarded the Medal of Honor took place on your 4th tour.
Correct.
In Vietnam. describe your responsibilities and where you were on the first three.
The other time I was over there aboard the Brister, and after that I went over with Charlie Company, which was a SEAL team, which Mike Lacaze and Hal Kirkendall and a bunch of Kenny Myers and other Wayne Hampton, a bunch of other guys were in my training class that went with us. And then the next tour I was actually in Thailand and Laos, working. Of course, we weren't there during this period of time, and then I went back to Vietnam, and I didn't have to go back. The CO asked me to please, would I go back over there, and I took 6 brand new kids. I'd never done beam in them, and back to Vietnam to bring them back alive, and with the grace of God, they're all back home alive.
What were you doing in Thailand and Laos?
Can't really talk about that because actually, we're like I said, we weren't really there. Remember, it came out 25 years later, so it was declassified. Of course, it's kind of hard to see what It's not like they got a big sign up there saying, "Hey, don't cross this line" or something like that. So, of course, we found out we had several Medal of Honor recipients receive the medal after the declassification of the operations, Air Force and stuff, and LRP ops and stuff like that.
All right, so it's your 4th tour. It's 1972, October 31st,
Right.
Halloween 1972. How did the day start?
Actually, it started pretty easy. Only 2 people really knew about the operation was Tommy Norris and myself. I had handpicked 2 of the Vietnamese SEALs, LDNs, I had worked with on previous tours to Vietnam. Even when I was in Thailand, I'd still go to Vietnam to help out and then go back to Thailand. Of course, working for MACV back in that period of time. And one was named Dang and the other one was named Quan. And great guys. They were very, very combat ready. They had been in many, many firefights. You have to think, we were over there for 6 months to a year. These guys have spent their whole life fighting a war, so they... And then the eyes to be, Commodore Shively was in charge of all the Special Navy Operation Team. He was in charge with Tu Thai Hep, which was a commanding officer of all the Vietnamese SEALs. And at the time, the head of military forces, they wanted us to run this operation up near Qua Viet that the NVA had already taken over Quan Tri in Hue City, and we were trying to push them back. September of 1972, they pulled all the military forces out of Vietnam with the exception of Navy SEALs, Army Special Forces, Marine Recon. And we ran all the operations then with the support of the Royal Marines, Vietnamese Royal Marines, and also the Vietnamese Army. And then we had the Navy supported us with aircraft and also ships, and so did the Air Force and the Army, so A-10s and stuff like that to help give air power support over that. And so we went up north, myself and Tommy, and nobody knew where we were going except Tommy and I and the Commodore. And we went 15 miles out and took a left turn and went up past North Vietnam. And we were going to be vectored in by the USS Morgan and Newport News, but we didn't know about the Newport News had to leave their site because they had been heavily hit in Quan Tri, and they went down to give gunfire support to the city of Quan Tri to help hold back the NVA, the North Vietnamese Army. And so they vectored us in, and a vector is where they shoot an azimuth from the ship 15 miles off, and they shoot it. And so if you're 1 degree off 15 miles away, it's quite a difference. And they put us actually in the past north of the DMZ. And they thought it was the Qua Viet River, but it was actually the Ben Ha River, which was in North Vietnam. And so we inserted, and everything else is history. We did what we call a horseshoe. You go 5 clicks middle, 5 clicks north, and 5 clicks back out and hit the ocean. And we were trying to do a body snatch because the best way of intel is capturing somebody, and then you get the most up-to-date intelligence at that period of time. And we thought was doing pretty good. We captured one guy, and I had to eliminate the other guy, and then we got surrounded, and we were all wounded, and except Tommy was shot in the head and lost his eye and his front lobar part of his brain. I was hit 7 times, and Quan was hit once, but lost his whole right end of his buttocks, and Dang was hit several times in his back. So, but here we are today.
Wow. So you talked about the body snatch, and then the one, I believe, that tried to run, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, he did.
And you pursued him.
I pursued him, and I chased him down, and I shot him twice, and he fell to as far as I know, he was eliminated, is what I said. And then when I looked up, everybody was after me, and Tommy came off the top of this bunker and shot a LAW rocket into the trees. He wasn't trying to hit anything. He was just trying to a diversion so I could escape back across the creek, back up to our where there's nowhere to be safe, basically. So we engaged approximately 75 bad guys during that period of time.
The 4 of you.
Yeah. Well, the Thai officer never shot one round the whole time. He was told that he had been combat ready, but it came to find out later on that he had never been in a firefight in his life, but that was a different issue. He did his best. I put Quan over on my eastern flank, which I had the ocean if they tried to flank me. That I was out on the point. I had a big lagoon on the other side. Tommy and Dane were on top of the bunker, which is approximately 25 feet tall, and actually it was a tunnel down inside of it. So if there was gunfire support coming in from the Navy shooting into there, because they knew it was, they would go down in that tunnel and wait out till they quit firing, then they'd come back out.
Mike, let's take a quick break in your story. We'll be right back with much more with Mike Thornton, recipient of the Medal of Honor from Vietnam, on Veterans Chronicles. Our guest on Veterans Chronicles is Mike Thornton. He's a veteran of Vietnam, U.S. Navy SEAL, and a recipient of the Medal of Honor. We're in the middle of the story of the action that earned him the Medal of Honor. And Mike, you were talking about how this rapid response unit was coming back out of the village. You had protection from your 2 other combat-ready friends.
Yeah.
You had a lagoon on one side, ocean over here.
Yeah.
But it's still essentially 3 on 75.
Yeah, well, actually it was 4. It was Tommy, Dang. Dang had the radio, then Quan and me. And actually at the rear security we had, we could see as far as the eye could see. We could actually see the Bien Hoa River, which is in North Vietnam. But 500 yards from there was a sand dune just by itself. And during the firefight, I had already been wounded 6 times. And at that period of time, I was the only one that had been wounded with shrapnel wounds from a grenade. Tommy told me to fall back with Quan and Thai, the young Vietnamese officer, and we fell back. And he was as we retracted back, Tommy was go keep the bad guys chasing us, and we would support his retraction back to the sand dune, because that gave us 500 meters, 500 yards of just open beach. There was nothing in between us. Of course, during the firefight, they had dunes all over the place, so they would come over here or come over there. And what I'd do, I'd roll over here and eliminate several people, then I'd fall back and eliminate and throw a couple grenades, and I'd move up. So I gave them a false pretense about how many people we really had. They didn't know if we had 20 or 3 or 4, but by me moving around and coming in different areas and eliminating those guys, it gave them a false pretense about how many people we had firing, because they knew Tommy was firing from up there on top of that thing, and Dang was up there shooting too, even though Tommy was on the radio with getting communications with later on that actually picked us up off the coast of North Vietnam.
You also mentioned the shrapnel wounds you suffered from a grenade. I saw another presentation you made where you explained how this grenade took a lot longer to go off, and you and the enemy were kind of
throwing it back and forth. We had captured a lot of grenades, and it was very it wasn't like American grenade, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, boom, 4,000. This one you would pull the pin, which was like a match, And when you did it, it'd go off in 18,000 or 28,000. So I knew I had enough time to throw it back and forth, but when it came back over for the fifth time on my side, I said, this thing's going to blow off, because I was already at 26,000 when I rolled over. The grenade went off and I was wounded. I yelled out, and Tommy was yelling, Mike, buddy, and I never said another word. And I just laid on my back, and the guys came over the top of the dome, and I eliminated those guys. And that's when Tommy made up. I said, okay, let's fall back to there. And he said, I'll stay up here, and when you guys retreat, then you guys can cover our retreat back. At that period of time, they saw us running back, and the charge came on again. And Tommy had been shot in the left temple. He was up actually shooting a LOL rocket, as he did before. And him and Dang were going to make their retreat down the hill to where we were. During that period of time, Tommy had gunfire support with the USS Morgan. And the reason we knew how long the firefight lasted, the Morgan started keeping the records of all our phone conversations, and the firefight lasted for 2 hours and 53 minutes, I think it was. And on Tommy's, Dang came down off the hill, and Dang said that Tommy was dead, Mike, Tommy's was dead. And I said, y'all stay here. And then I went back. And even though they grabbed me, said, no, he's dead, Mike, he's shot in the head. I went back. I thought he was dead when I picked him up and threw him over my shoulder, and I ran back with him 5 football fields away. And then
all these guys are shooting at you.
All these guys are shooting at me, and I was shot through my left calf then, and fell to the ground and picked Tommy back up. And so I was actually wounded 7 times that day, and Tommy was shot in the head. And Quan had shot his right buttocks off, and his femur muscle back here, and he couldn't swim. And then Dang had 2 implanted grenade hits in his back. So I swam that day with Tommy on my back and Quan in front of me, so for several hours until we got picked off the coast by Woody Woodruff. Because when SEALs we go in, we always keep our extraction force. We always take a Navy SEAL, and we had another 9 LDNs aboard the Vietnamese SEALs on board with Woody. And thank God that they didn't have to come in, because at that period of time we'd been already surrounded by over 600 bad guys. So it was and good. Woody, and I knowing Woody, just knowing his mentality, he'd have still tried to come in to save our lives.
There's so much you just mentioned that I want to follow up on, but what we have time for before the break is, you mentioned after you were hit by the grenade, you were kind of laying on your back and you weren't speaking, and you mentioned you eliminated the 4 enemy fighters. How did you do that when you had just been wounded?
Oh, adrenaline does a lot of stuff for you, I promise you that. In the rush of the day, it's not about you, it's about what we're trying to do. I mean, it's like I tell all these kids, there's only one obstacle in your life that can stop you, and that's yourself. So what are you going to do, sit there and cry, or you'll get up and do something about it? And as my father always said, if it's to be, it's up to me. And I knew I was the one that's going to stop those guys to getting to Tommy and to Dang and Quan. So.
Well, let's take one more break here. We're talking with retired U.S. Navy SEAL Mike Thornton, recipient of the Medal of Honor, veteran of Vietnam, on Veterans Chronicles. Our guest this week on Veterans Chronicles is retired U.S. Navy SEAL Mike Thornton. He's a veteran of Vietnam and a recipient of the Medal of Honor. And just before the break, we were kind of going back to get a little more in depth on part of the narrative that Mike told from October 31st, 1972. Talk about the run to get to Tommy. What was that like? How were you dodging fire then, and what did you assess once you got to him?
When I could see Tommy on top of the dune, which was actually a bunker, and he was laying on his side, hanging over, and I ran up the dune, and of course, bullets are flying everywhere. How they ever missed me on my return up there, I'll never know, but they had several guys coming over the top where Tommy was, and I eliminated those guys. And I just grabbed Tommy, and at that period of time, I thought Tommy was dead. Started running down the bunker, and about that time, a 5-inch from the USS Morgan hit and blew me approximately 25 feet in the air, and I could see Tommy going off my shoulders. And it's really, it messes up your equilibrium, and it's like, the only way I can say is somebody was to cup their hands and come up behind you without you knowing it and slapping you in the ears as hard as you can. And of course, you know the bad guys are still after you, but you're trying to get back up off the ground. I could see Tommy, but I was trying to get my senses back. And then I went over and grabbed Tommy, and at that time he said, "Mike, buddy." And then he went unconscious again. And I said, the SOB's still alive. So I picked him up and ran off with him. Then I got shot through my left calf, fell to the ground. And then I picked him up again and ran with him to the sand dune where Ty and, well, actually Quan and Dang were there. Ty had already gotten in the water and swam off. But Quan and Dang, then we leapfrogged to the ocean, and then I got Tommy through the surf zone, and after I got him through the surf zone, I put a life jacket on him and tied him to my back. And then I looked over and I saw Quan struggling in the water. I could see Dang ahead of me, but Quan had been shot through his right buttocks area and his femur muscle, the large muscle in the back of his leg. He couldn't swim, so I swam over and got him. Put my arms underneath him, and he grabbed Tommy's neck and held Tommy on my back as we swam out to sea.
So you've been wounded 7 times,
right?
Plus the concussion.
Right.
And you're swimming with a guy on your back for how many hours?
Approximately 3 hours, and a guy in front of me. Actually, I had my arms, like if you had raised your arms, I'd put my arms and had you right in my body, because that way it would run us down. So in other words, when he could breathe. But using him was kind of like using a washboard to push the water around. And then we had Tommy on top of my back. Because one bad thing about Tommy, he was going into shock. I could tell that he was going, and that him being on top of my back, it was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The warmth was with the water between my body and his body, and it would help keep him from going in deep shock. But he ended up going into deep shock anyway. And with the grace of God, he's still here with us.
That's amazing. I would imagine every ounce of what you went through in SEAL training paid off for you that day.
It was, poor guys I weighed about 228 pounds or 200, and I had a 31-inch waist, and I was in unbelievable shape, but I couldn't even pull I got Tommy up on the boat it was a Vietnamese junk made out of concrete. It was 39 feet long, and Woody was communicating, and they found us, me, Quan, Dang, Tommy, and I. And Woody, he was debriefing Ty, the Vietnamese officer, about what happened. And Ty didn't remember anything. He was just scared out of his wits. But later on, if I found out that, he should have never been with us in the first place, I kind of felt sorry for him. But he's alive today. I actually helped support him and his family, and actually Quan and his family to come to the States. And Quan and his family have 2 fishing boats now near Seattle, Washington. And Ty, the officer, he taught for 22 years at Harrisburg University in Pennsylvania, and now it's a very big Vietnamese community there in Washington State, and he lives in Spokane, Washington now. So, but Dang never got out of the country. He was actually captured and assassinated.
What did they do after you got to the boat? Did they send you to a hospital somewhere?
No, we called the Newport News. We knew the Newport News had a doctor on board, and the Newport News came along. So we came alongside the Newport News. I pulled our boat up first, and they came over with a Jonathan ladder, and we put Tommy and carried him up there, and they couldn't get him through the door. So I just picked Tommy up and carried him through the Newport News down to the gurney, put him on the operating table, and then I went to debrief the admiral in charge of the Navy fleet out there, and debriefed him and the commanding officer of the Newport News what happened. Tommy was picked up by a helicopter, flew to Da Nang, and then from Da Nang he was flown by a 141, because we had all these doctors and neurosurgeons and all that stuff. As I said before, they had already pulled out except for the basic doctors, and they were actually at Clark's Air Force Base waiting on the release of our prisoner of wars, Admiral Stockdale, Leo Thornton, Bud Day, which are all Medal of Honor recipients too. And they had them there, so they flew Tommy straight to Clark's Air Force Base, and his first surgery went for 19 hours. And he went through 29 major surgeries after that. He spent almost 6.5 years in the hospital. And when I got my Medal of Honor, Tommy was still in Bethesda, Maryland, here in the D.C. area. And I kind of kidnapped him and took him to the White House. And Admiral Zumwalt was the chief of naval operations, and Mike, in a very short paragraph, why did you take him out of the hospital? I said, sir, I didn't leave him in Vietnam, and I sure wasn't going to leave him in the hospital when I wanted him next to me when I received the Medal of Honor from President Nixon. But I paid for that. I had to go to Admiral's Mass, so it's all right.
Doesn't sound like you regret the decision, though.
No, I don't.
How did you find out you were put in for the Medal of Honor, or that you were about to receive it?
Actually, Woody Woodruff told me. I said, "Are you crazy?" He said, "No, you," because I'd already, he said, "No, you've been put in for the Medal of Honor," and that was March. Actually, it was on almost my birthday, March of 1973. I came back on January the 13th of 1973. It was my father's birthday, and Woody said, "Have you heard?" I said, "No, I haven't heard nothing." He says, "You've been submitted for the Congressional Medal of Honor." I said, "Oh, you're crazy." And the next thing I know, I get a letter. And actually, my father knew I was going to get it before I knew about getting it. And Daddy's never flown in his lifetime. And because it came from the White House, he thought he had to fly up there. He said if he didn't, he would have drove or taken the train. But I think he was more excited about it than I was.
What was that day like? I know it meant a lot to you to have Tommy there next to you.
Oh, yeah. I kept Tommy for 4 days. I figured I was already in trouble, so I might as well enjoy it. And he stayed 4 days with me, and I put him underneath my brother's name in the hotel, so they didn't know who was who. And but it was exciting. We had a lot of fun. My mom and dad, my younger brother, and my family were there. I wish my baby sister would have been there, but she was pregnant and wasn't able to fly, so she wasn't able to come. But we had a bunch of old friends of mine, Dick Flanagan, his lovely wife Becky, and them, and so we had a bunch of SEALs. And when I actually had the presentation, there was only one Medal of Honor recipient there. That was Tommy. Wouldn't even had received his medal because he's received his medal almost 3 years after I received mine. But Tommy was there with me, and I was there when he received his medal from President Ford.
What was the conversation like? Usually there's a private conversation with the president. At least now there is. I don't know if there was then. Did you get a chance to spend a little time with the president?
Yeah, well, Nixon, yeah. I've always respected Nixon. Actually sent me a copy of every book he ever wrote, and it was quite entertaining. And he's always said, but a lot of people don't know, during World War I, he was Secretary of the Navy. And he hugged my mom and gave her a very unbelievable, the president, hugged me, nobody else. He never hugged nobody else. And it was, at the time, Thomas Moore was the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Moore, and what a great gentleman. He took my mom and dad by hand and took them all through the White House and introduced them to Mrs. Nixon and to the president and stuff like that. So I was standing in there somewhere by myself, talking with my brother and Tommy, and they were just treating him with so much respect because my father, like I said, he only had a 6th grade education. And but he, you could tell him that he was very, very excited to having that. He said, Mike, that guy's just like me, just a good old boy. I said, yeah, Daddy, he's just a good old boy.
From Whittier, yeah. Talk about Tommy's recovery. When was he finally done with the surgery?
I think his last surgery was about 6.5 years into it. They had to put different plates because when the bullet entered the left temple and it blew out the bursa, which the bursa is actually the sac that holds your brain in place. And they had to go in, but the problem is some of the plates they were putting in they didn't accept it, and they'd have to go back in and put another plate in and another plate in. And finally got everything in there, so he has 3 plates in his head. He's got one at the top, one on the side, and one in the front. And of course, he lost the front lobal part of his brain which basically is with taste and stuff like that, and memory. But the major part of the brain's in the back, where Tommy wasn't injured there at all. So he was a very lucky man, and he's still with us, and he's 75 years old and still raising horses up in Idaho.
And I've seen interviews with both of you. He's perfectly loquacious and everything else.
When we went into Vietnam, I said, I think we're in the wrong place. I'm always giving a hard time. I said, if you listen to me, you still have your brain in your eye. And he said, what do you think we should do? I said, well, you're the officer in charge. I'll just give you my stuff. But we're Mutt and Jeff. We see each other about 10 times a year. And my lovely wife, Rainey, and Teresa and Tommy and I, we get together. And it's like a big family affair. We were just in Philadelphia with them, giving away scholarships that my foundation gives to young children of Navy SEALs have lost, given the utmost. They've given their lives.
You were already great friends before this day.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
But what is the relationship like now?
We did a book by Honor Bound, and actually Mr. Stallone is looking at doing the movie, and it's about 50-something years of two guys, of their love, and how it hasn't disappeared. You know, we're together all the time, you know, throughout our lifetime, and he is the godfather of my children, so it's just, you know, it's like I say, if it's to be, it's up to me, and we keep that love and respect for each other. We're like Mutt and Jeff. I mean, he weighs 150 pounds soaking wet, and of course, I weigh 250-something pounds soaking wet. So, but we argue all the time. We have fun together, but it's the respect and love that we have for each other.
Difficult homecoming for a lot of Vietnam service members. Did you experience any of that?
Not really. Tommy still has some dreams. I had one dream, and I had 5 of my friends killed. I had to go down and identify their bodies, and that was in 1969. And I've never had another bad dream about that. Of course, on this great day, freedom is not free. Freedom is written in blood. And the medal I wear, I don't think I deserve, never will feel I deserve it. There's some people says I do, but I wear it for the 2,854,000 is given the utmost. And of course, you go to Arlington National Cemetery or some of the other Texas state cemeteries and all the other great national cemeteries we have throughout this nation, how many people have given the utmost to keep America free, and that's what gets me about it. And I don't like getting into politics, but somebody seems like they want to be socialists, and socialism has never worked in any country in the world. But they say it's going to be different in America, and it's not. We got to keep what's made us great. The Bill of Rights, the Constitution of the United States, it's worked for us all these years. And that's the reason why we're the greatest country in the world. And I've been to 90 countries in my lifetime, and I know how special this country is.
You feel a responsibility when you wear that medal, don't you?
Oh yeah, believe it or not, it's probably harder to wear it than it is to earn it in a lot of ways. It puts a great responsibility on the people, and we love this nation so much. You know, I look at my lovely wife and the men and women who came back that are in a coffin. They never have another chance to hug their children or their great-grandchildren or their great-great-grandchildren, you know, and I have that luxury today because of the people that went before me, it went with me, and it's keeping us free after me. So I just wish that for all my great-grandkids and my grandkids and stuff like that, that we continue serving this great nation called America.
It's such a distinguished career, and we should point out that you served all the way as a Navy SEAL through Desert Storm. Real quick, what did you do in Desert Storm?
I always say I was one of the original 10 that started SEAL Team 6 in 1980, the counter-terrorist group, and I was working with the British SBS SAS counter-terrorist group in the 70s, and then we started SEAL Team 6 in 1980, and of course with Delta Force and us, and General Schultes was JSOC, and of course we all know what happened later on with what's taking down bin Laden and stuff like that. But I watched this community when I came in the SEAL team. We had 236 SEALs worldwide, and now we're much higher than that. And I'm very proud of each and every one of those young men who volunteer to go do God's work, as I call it. And from now on, it's going to be Special Forces, the Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Air Force, and Coast Guard is going to keep us working to keep us free in this great nation called America. But I served it, and when they said I couldn't serve it no more, I said, okay, it's just another chapter in the book. What's Mike Thornton going to do now? And you see what I do now. So.
Absolutely. There's so many things to be proud of. Is there anything you're most proud of?
My wife.
Mike, we'll call time there. Unfortunately, we're out of it. Thank you, sir, for your service to our country.
Thank you.
And thank you for being with us today.
All right, thank you very much.
Mike Thornton, recipient of the Medal of Honor, retired U.S. Navy SEAL, and a Vietnam War veteran. I'm Greg Columbus. This is Veterans Chronicles.